Good evening, everyone, and afternoon. We get people all around the world, so we get all kinds of times. But I'd like to be the first to welcome you to our new series called Moonlit Theology. This is coming off from a interesting conversation, multiple conversations that I've had over my live streams, in which we have discussed some of the parts of theology and different aspects of it. And I feel like it's important to give a place for those questions to be answered, as well as for me to be able to talk. As you guys know, I am Colorless Moon. I'm also known as Isaiah. I am not a professional theologist. I am not trained in those kind of things, but I do like to study, and I really do like to study and collect information. And so I wanted to do essentially what is an introductory series on theology. Now, that does mean that we may go at it from a different source than a lot of people know, and that is important. I think it's important to look at this in very different ways. So, this episode, of course, it is our inaugural episode. I'd like to welcome everybody as we get started. Um, we're talking about a very simple question: what is the Bible? This series will be taking it from a Christian theological perspective. And I'm not talking about what is in the words. I am simply talking about what this is. Specifically, if it was another book on the shelf, what it is. And I think the first thing that we should probably talk about is why it's important. Um, it's because we hear a lot about this book. We hear a lot about the Bible as a whole, and we hear a lot about the book. It's important that we understand what it is physically before you delve into its content. Because of that, that is what we're going to be talking about. We are going to be going over in a few episodes different aspects of this physically, from its historical record to different aspects of reading it contextually. Critically reading it is a big thing to do. At the end of this conversation, we will, of course, be having a question and answer for everybody. TTS will be enabled, and we'll be talking about it. But for now, we are simply going to break down what this book is, because I think that's a great place to start in understanding Christian theology from an inside perspective or from an outside perspective, because I think the first thing we're getting wrong about this is not one book. I think that's very important to get out. This is not one book. And looking at it like it's one book really does a detriment to what it is. Because first and foremost, that is the wrong tab that I'm opening. First and foremost, the Bible, and of course, this does vary by denomination and different translation, but at its core, the Bible is a collection of 66 books. Now, that's important because if you read it all like it's one book, you're gonna get a lot of things off, because it was not only 66 books, 788,000 words. We're talking almost 800,000 words. Most novels are around 60,000 words. So you're looking at over 10 novels worth of books. And then, of course, it was written by multiple authors with multiple voices, multiple multiple different aspects. And before I will talk about anything questions after, I would ask that chat, we are live, so I would ask that chat keep things friendly and open-minded, because we're not out here converting. We're just simply talking about what it is. Now, multiple authors over the course of 1500 years. Now, why is that important? It's because you're going to see a lot of voices. You're going to hear a lot of different aspects. Specifically, you're also going to see that it is more than one book. In fact, it is split into multiple different categories. Like I said, if you read it all the way through, you're going to get different categories. You're going to get mythology, you're going to get history, you're going to get law, poetry, prophecy, and of course, letters. And if you're reading them all like it's one big story, you're going to miss where things veer into poetry, where things veer into mythology. And I think that's really important, because when you look at it as a whole and go, oh, we can break it down into these different areas, then you can start understanding where not only the Christians come at it, but also the Jewish perspective that comes at it. Because keep in mind, the majority of this book is not Christian, it is specifically Jewish. And that is something that can be brought up and we'll probably talk about later. But for right now, we are just going to kind of discuss the categories. And what I mean by these categories, these are not the only categories. In fact, some books bleed between them. We're looking at you, Exodus. We have to talk, like, Exodus is weird because it is in multiple different camps, because it is history and law. Like, there's a lot to it. So we're going to jump into this. Now, first and foremost, the easiest category is mythology. Now, everyone's going to hear mythology, and that's in the Christian world, that's a get your pitchforks and torches ready kind of thing. As soon as I find a lot of people who talk about the Bible don't like it when somebody says mythology the second you bring in the Christian perspective. But we got to talk about this, because when you talk about Genesis 1 to 11, you've got to understand that it is written from a different perspective. It is written from let me get this green box out of here, by the way. Um, it's written from a different perspective for a different audience and a different culture, oral tradition passed down. And when oral tradition gets passed down before it is written, it is, of course, mythologized. Now, Genesis 1 to 11, it bears hallmarks of, within its Hebrew, and without the Hebrew, it bears hallmarks to Hebrew poetry. And a lot of times when you're talking Hebrew poetry, you're talking Hebrew myth, because it is an oral tradition. So when you're getting into that, I always want to put, first and foremost, Genesis 1 to 11. We are reading it in very different ways. I think there's a problem where a lot of people come at the Bible from all of this is literal and factual and should be dissected as such. But it's like, okay, wait, when you're dealing with 66 different books of mythology and oral tradition, you have to account for how much of it is actually mythologized. And theologians and a lot of people can definitely point to the fact that Genesis 1 to 11, before the introduction of Abraham, which is where Jewish history begins, is considered mythology. They bear poetic hallmarks. They are written with clear structures and clear morals in mind. They're very much simpler than history, which means they fall into that mythological camp. And of course, that, like I said, we're going through the different categories, and when you're reading this, we'll talk about kind of reading it. Next time, we'll be talking about reading it in a critical manner, because that matters. Being able to break this down critically does matter, and being able to look at it critically does matter. Mythology, of course, our next one over here is history. Now, this is, let me move my face because I'm blocking part of it. There is a lot of books. We're talking 66 books, and a lot of them are history. Now, you talk about Genesis 12 on being history, because that is the introduction of Abraham. That is where Jewish history says they begin. That is where their beliefs begin. That is where they say these are real people we know about going in. And you're like, okay, Abraham through Isaac, and you get into the founding fathers of the Jewish tradition. And then, of course, you go through Exodus and Numbers and Joshua, and this is all Jewish history. And you are meant to read these as historical texts, and you break down the historical text. Yeah, that's just the software being the software. Um, um, and you break it down as historical text. I think that is really important because, one, there's a few things you need to look at with historical texts. First of all, bias. I'm not out here saying the Bible is unbiased. It's extremely biased. It's the foundation of a religious community and a religious nation. Therefore, it's going to be biased. Like anything, it will be biased. And you can break down the histories going through from the founding of Israel to not the diaspora, but essentially the time of silence when before Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We'll talk about those. You can see I have those marked a little bit differently. That is where New Testament breaks to Old Testament. That's where it starts being Christian history to us and not Jewish history. And that's really important. It is a Judeo-Christian book where we have the Jewish tradition, the Christian tradition built upon the Jewish tradition. And that's important to understand. Like I said, context is really important in theology, because if you're not coming at it from hey, these are cultures built on other cultures, then, and you have so much history and myth and everything going into it, you're going to miss a lot. And so you have all this history going here. After history, of course, we have what people get into a lot, poetry. They're like, this is what confuses a lot of people because you're dealing with poetry. Now we're putting Job in here. Job is kind of awkward. Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Songs. This is simple. This is poetry. Psalms are supposed to be songs to God. Proverbs are supposed to be proverbs to live your life by. These are not literal books here. These 5 are very much, hey, here's some poetry. Here's some songs. Here's some proverbs, some poems, different things to go into. And that's important because a lot of people treat them like I said, treating the whole book as literal does it a very big disservice. And then you have poetry. After poetry, then we have prophecy. Now, prophecy is hard because we have very different aspects of prophecy between the Christian side and the also, I should probably move myself out of Revelation's way, because these are Jewish prophets. I think that's important. Again, most of these prophets are coming from the Jewish perspective, and because of that, they are talking about something that sorry, what was I? They were talking about very different things. Some of these were prophesying over events that would happen to Israel. Some of these were prophesying over events that were still to come. Some of these were prophesying over a Messiah that was to come. Christians at this point, that's one of the big differences between Christians and Jewish tradition is we believe the Messiah has already come. So, minor prophets there. You got your major prophets, minor prophets, and then I put Revelation on its own because Revelation is Christian prophecy out in the woods somewhere. And if this is sounding very simple, it is very simple. This is the basics. This is, hey, here's what this is. And we'll dive into looking at it critically and all the kinds of things as we go along. This is only our first episode and starting this thing. So if this seems very simple, it is very simple. And you notice I'm not out here listing every book. Oh, we all know I could come out here and list every book. I like to yap. But that does everybody a disservice if I am just out here yapping about, hey, here's what these books are. So yeah, you break it down, major prophets, minor prophets, Revelation. And it's like, great, those are books of prophecy. You read them in a critical light. You read them, look at events that go on, what they're talking about. They're vague. They're on the verge of poetry sometimes. The prophets were some weird people. If you've ever looked up how some of the prophets behaved, they're interesting. There was I gotta look up which one it is, but there was a prophet that literally would run into town screaming. There was another one that had like diagrams and stuff and art that he'd smash apart and weird stuff with prophecy. Of course, are we missing one? Oh my gosh, we are missing one. Where's the law? The law. There we are. I'm like, did we skip one? The law. This is the one that gets a lot of people, and they look at it. Now, the law is, I know, what the law is 4 books, 3.5 books. Exodus combines part of it because in the history of Exodus, at some point they start going through the law and they start establishing the law for the people of Israel coming out of Egypt. That's historical stuff. And then we get into the law. This is Jewish law. That is important, is it's Jewish law. As Christians, there's parts we don't follow. We have a different philosophy as far as the law. These were the laws handed down within the covenant with Israel. That is important. That is an important connotation. So as far as what Christians believe about the law, most theologians and a lot of Christians, this is the best way to boil it down. Christians follow the law that was handed down by Moses and confirmed by the New Testament, by Christ. So that's important. What was handed down and what was confirmed. Stop it. Keyboard's misbehaving today. And so when you're looking at the law, it's important to read it critically because this was the foundation of the law of Israel. Not the law of Christians, but the law of the Jewish people. And so it's like looking at that critically going, okay, what does this say? Because you get a lot of cherry picking with the Bible. I think that's a huge issue. You get a lot of cherry picking. And I always say, if you can cherry pick a verse out of there, somebody can cherry pick the opposite. Because context matters. Context really does matter. You can cherry pick a verse. So it's very much the law is law of Israel. handed down. This is the law of the Jewish people, the law of the Old Covenant. We will talk about covenants later, but for now, this is essentially the law that was handed down by God to the Jewish people. Not necessarily for Christians, but some of it, what was there. Sorry, am I rambling? This is my first time doing this kind of thing. I don't usually do presentations live. I play video games. uh, and then, of course, the last one is letters. Now, this is the extent of these are extensive letters from the from Paul, from the apostles. We'll talk about them later too. About from the apostles to the churches and to each other. Essentially, these books are literally letters, and if you read some of them are great. Some of them are love letters, like, "Hey, your church is doing amazing." Other ones are, "Paul's gonna smack you with this thing." Like, Paul's gonna come around, and it's great to read it from that light. We some of us Christians, we've seen the memes of, like, these letters are brutal, and they are essentially breaking out the theology of the time period. These are the letters from Paul, not immediately after, but soon after Jesus' death, within that lifespan, and throughout you have all these letters. Now, they do various things. These letters are important because they answer a lot of questions. They answer a lot of things about what Christians are doing that might be, that not might be, but are unchristian. And Paul goes hard. If you've ever read Paul's writings, Paul goes hard. If you want to, like, he was spitting fire from that quill in prison, and reading him is just a wild ride because he'll be like, "You guys are doing great, and you're all stupid." It's great. It's some great writing and reading. Honestly, I'll be honest, with the letters, I didn't like the letters originally. Christians avoid talking about the hard parts of the letters, which is, I think, a very big disservice. Um, but I will talk about that later. I'm avoiding the preachy parts until later in the series, when we're done getting through the basics of, here's what this big book is, and where it came from. So the letters. I mean, they're just, that's the thing. They're letters. I got nothing else to say about them. This is very simple, like, here's what the book is. There's not a lot to it. We've already been at it for 20 minutes. You can tell I like to yap because I already been yapping about 20 minutes on this topic. So I might as well let some people actually ask some questions, because that's important. The thing about theology that I think is very important is not to sit here and preach at people, but let people ask questions. Let people try to understand what they believe and understand what we believe, because there's a lot of conversations that are not talked about when they could be. And that's very important. So at this point, I would like to kind of open the floor. This has been a very direct kind of, hey, literally, here it is. Here's what it is. This is what the big book is. But if you guys want to ask some questions, any questions are more than welcome. I'm more than willing to talk about it. I will warn you, I'm not a theologian. I'm not afraid to say, hey, I don't know that.